The red pill of imagination. Are you curious what that is? Be able to change not just your reality, but those around you. One of the big struggles that many people have, and I myself was included in that, when we keep those memories alive, what we remember of a person is how we will condemn or we will further the person. That past is going to have an influence for how you create in the future. The red pill of imagination is going to help you create a greater version of reality. If you want to figuratively take this red pill of imagination, you'll need to be aware of the following. What past memories, experiences, hurts, events have you not let go of? And by default, the memories you hold of others, if you have negative memories of people, experiences that you've had with them, events that you haven't let go of, and you keep those memories of those experiences alive, you are actually going to continue to create more of that in your life. So we know that imagination creates reality and that what you assume, you create. The red pill of imagination that I speak about is the art of self-revision, which you can use to reshape your memories, your attitudes, your experiences, not just for yourself, but for others in your life as well. Because when you do this, not only do you raise your consciousness, but you raise the consciousness of those around you as well. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Fazila Bijo. I help you use the power of your imagination to revise, to resolve, and to clear limitations of your mindset, your patterns, and your beliefs so that you can create a greater version of reality. One of the fundamentals of using the law of assumption is knowing how to revise. Because if you don't know how to revise, you will forever continue to live from the past. That past is going to have an influence for how you create in the future. Unless you have forgiven and completely forgotten about your past experiences and challenges and conflicts, you're going to find that it will continue to show up in your current circumstances and it will have an impact on your future experiences as well. Your action once you've watched this video is to observe what triggers you in terms of circumstances and people in your life. Watch the 3 stories. We'll pick up steps that people have applied in terms of revising their stories. Now, their scenarios may be different to yours, but the steps are the same. The 3 stories that I'll be covering today are about revision. Once you have watched them, I invite you to choose one past experience you wish was different for you. Created a story about the experience and you get to uncreate it. The art of self-revision is to revise the self. It's to revise our consciousness so that we no longer hold that limitation and mindset that we've always held on to. When you change that in your now, you also change the memory of it. When you change the memory of it, it no longer has to be recreated in your present and in your future. This is why I'm encouraging you to learn revision, learn how to revise so that you can change your past experiences and your past stories. Once I learned about revision, I practiced it daily and I learned that revision is about changing the self. We are changing how we react, we are changing what we believe, we are changing attitudes, we are changing how we remember the circumstances around events and people. Now, when we change that in our consciousness, we no longer hold on to that old story. I'll be talking about how I use revision to elevate and raise others in my consciousness. This video is for you if you want to revise feelings of guilt around something that you've done or something that you didn't do. If you want to raise someone else in terms of their situation in life, look at story number 2. And the third story is for you if you want to change a situation around where you are owed money and you want to be paid back. The teachings of today's video are based on chapter 12, attitudes from the law and the promise. This chapter talks about how imagination can reshape memories and raise others as opposed to keeping them in limitation. In this chapter, Neville emphasizes how mental attitudes and imagination reshapes our outer reality. Delving further into the conservative aspect of imagination, in my previous video, I speak about all 3 aspects of imagination. In this video, I'm going to be touching on the conservative aspect. Our imagination preserves and reuses past experiences and images. For as long as we hold on to them, it will continue to show up in our reality. And therefore, revision, that red pill of imagination, is going to help you change your perception, change reality. It's going to remove elements that are disruptive, or you can add new elements to create the desired state. Neville says, memory, though faulty, is adequate to the call for sameness. If we remember another as we have always known him, we recreate him in that image. And therefore, the past, what we knew of him, will be recognized in the present, current time. When left unchanged or unaltered, you will only remember the person the way in which you have always known them. And this is the law of assumption, is whatever you assume as true becomes reality. Another way that Neville speaks about this is an assumption, though false, when persisted in, hardens into fact. So your memory, even though it may be faulty, the other person, maybe there was a misunderstanding that you've had with someone, you have a version of it in your reality, that person has a version of it in their reality. And so what happens is that you can only remember it from your perspective, and they will only remember it from their perspective. And because our experiences are colored through our judgments, our beliefs, our attitudes, and even if those are misguided, and even if we are wrong, we will not create anything differently, because we have created a reality and we have created the belief around an assumption that may not be true. Neville says, because imagining creates reality, there is always room for improvement. You can reconstruct and reshape your memories with new content. Your memory, your feeling, how you see others, how you see yourself, how you see experiences. And when you know about the law of assumption and that your assumptions create reality, you can now go and rewrite undesirable experiences so that they become a greater version in your reality. And so we're going to be looking at our first case study talks exactly to this, how we can raise someone else in our consciousness. So the story starts with, more than 20 years ago, when I was a green farm boy newly arrived in Boston to attend school, a panhandler asked me for money for a meal. Although the money I had was pitifully insufficient for my own needs, I gave him what was in my pocket. A few hours later, the same man, by this time staggering drunk, stopped me again and asked for money. I was so outraged to think the money that I could so ill afford had been put to such use. I made myself a solemn pledge that I would never again listen to the plea of a street beggar. Through the years, I kept my pledge, but every time I refused anyone, my conscience needled me. I felt guilty to the point of developing a sharp pain in my stomach, but I couldn't bring myself to unbend. I want to talk to this point once we've covered the stories. I've had the similar experience of feeling those pangs of guilt for refusing to give money to beggars. Continuing with FB's story, the early part of this year, a man stopped me as I was walking my dog and asked for money so he could eat. True to the old pledge, I refused him. His manner was gracious as he accepted my refusal. He even admired my dog and spoke of a family in New York State he knew that raised Cocker Spaniels. This time, my conscience was really pricking me. As he went on his way, I determined to remake that scene as I wished it had been. So I stopped right there on the street, closed my eyes for only a few moments, and enacted the scene differently. In my imagination, I had the same man approach me, only this time he opened the conversation by admiring my dog. After we had talked a moment, I had him say, "I don't like to ask you this, but I really need something to eat. I have a job that begins tomorrow morning, but I've been out of work and tonight I'm hungry." I then reached into my imaginary pocket, pulled out an imaginary $5 bill, and gladly gave it to him. This imaginal act immediately dissolved the guilty feeling and the pain. I know from your teaching that an imaginal act is fact, so I knew I could grant anyone what he asked and by faith in the imaginal act, consented to the reality of his having it. FB immediately revises the interaction that he's had with the man who asked him money. The old pledge was something that he held on to for 20 years, and he realizes that he can make a change for this person. And so he brings that person into his imagination and he reenacts the scene with him, making it a favorable outcome, raising the person in his imagination. He says, 4 months later, as I was again walking my dog, the same man approached me and opened the conversation by admiring my dog. Here's a beautiful dog, he said. Young man, I don't suppose you remember me, but a while back I asked you for some money, and you very kindly said no. I say kindly because if you had given it to me, I would still be asking for money. Instead, I got a job the very next morning, and now I'm on my feet and have some self-respect again. I knew his job was a fact when I imagined it that night, some 4 months before, but I won't deny there was immense satisfaction in having him appear in the flesh to confirm it. There's some important points here. FB raises the man in his imagination, and it's 4 months later that the man meets him again on the street. Now, in that 4 months, he didn't dwell on it. He didn't question, didn't he get a job? He took his imaginal act as being a fact, and he saw it as done. So that is quite important when you are going to revise your scenes, when you're going to revise any undesirable experience. You rewrite the experience and you do not go back into the old memories. So you must drop the old memories. Do not go back into what was. Do not hold on to memories. Do not remember things the way they were. You will only remember it as you would like it to be. And that would be the desired result. That will be the desired end. Now, so Neville says the very act of correction or cure is always revise, but one must start with oneself. If you're not aware, I live in South Africa, in Cape Town, where it is not unusual. In South Africa, it's not unusual to have people begging at street corners, at traffic lights, wherever it's possible for them to be visible, to beg for money. I could resonate with the story from FB about having those feelings of guilt when I would encounter homeless people. Old people begging would be very tough for me. I remember a particularly triggering emotional experience. And this was when I was on holiday abroad in Turkey. It was in the middle of winter, and my husband and I were on our way out to dinner, and I saw a woman, she must have been about 35 years of age, sitting on the pavement. It was cold that night. I mean, I still remember I had my jacket on. I was bundled up quite warmly. What struck me, though, was this woman sitting on the pavement, and she had a 6-month-old baby with her. I gave her a few Turkish lira, only to find out that things are not always what they appear to be. The very next day, I was chatting to our Turkish city guide and asking him, like, what happens, women are on the street with babies, and what happens in terms of helping them out, etc. And he basically said that it was a scam. There was a scheme where they were hiring out babies to beggars so that beggars could earn more money. And that was me not feeling great, that I was perpetuating it, and I decided I would not give money to someone who was begging. So fast forward 4 years ago, we moved from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And it was when I first started to learn about Neville's teachings, and I got to learn about revision. When I would go out to the shops, I would see young teens hanging out at traffic lights begging for money. Now, I'd made the rule not to give money to anyone who was begging at the traffic lights because it perpetuates the problem. It doesn't actually help the problem. Twice in the beginning, I was asked if I would buy them something to eat, and I preferred doing that because I didn't want to give money, but I also felt guilty that here they were struggling, etc. But something important happened then in reading Neville's work and reading this particular case study. helped me become aware that if I was looking at people who were begging on street corners as powerless and helpless, that I was the one holding that version of them in my imagination. And so Neville says it is one's attitude that must be changed. I also became aware I was judging people begging to be a wrongness, and I made it real. So I revised my perspective in terms of my judgments. I revised how I was seeing them. I revised my attitudes. I also raised them in my consciousness and my imagination. And this was the thing, though. I imagined them to have their needs fulfilled. It wasn't up to me to decide that they should stop begging, get a job, or even for the kids, for them to go to school. That would be trying to control the how. I always remind myself the how is not up to me. God, imagination, source has ways that I know not of. So being mindful of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto you. I asked myself, would I want someone to imagine all my needs being fulfilled? Yes. Would I want someone to decide that I needed a job for me to actually raise myself out of my circumstances? Probably not. It wouldn't be a kindness because it's not a job that I require. I know that a job is not how I create. A job is the channel. A job would be the channel and it would not be the means for how I create. And I know that I create using my imagination. So again, I want to emphasize, I do not rewrite the other person. I rewrite how I'm experiencing that person who may be begging or that person who may be having a difficult challenge in life. I revise how I see them. I revise my own perceptions, my attitudes, my behaviors. So A Course in Miracles says, nothing real can be threatened because nothing unreal exists. And to this end, nothing unreal, poverty, ill health, not having enough money, not having your needs met, all of that is an illusion because your imagination creates. What is happening is that person believes in that state of consciousness of being in lack, that they are in lack. Raising someone else in my imagination brings about the change and the possibility for them to actually achieve and create something greater. When we make a judgment and we believe it to be true, we assume it to be true, it becomes real. And remember that the inner presence, God, imagination, hears all. Now, if whatever you hold to be true in your subconscious is what you are going to see manifest in your reality. That is why we revise the self. What we do is we raise others. We raise what we witness in 3D, in our physical reality. We can look at others in horror and we can make a judgment that they are powerless, or we can raise them in our imagination. Like we saw in the story when FB raised the older gentleman in his imagination, because the man desired as well not to just rely on handouts, he could actually raise his situation as well. And when you remind yourself everything is available to everyone and God plays all parts, should they desire to change their circumstances, they will change. Revise in imagination. When you go into the dimensionally larger world and you revise, by raising your consciousness, you change the version of reality that you would be living in. Because Neville says, none is to be discarded, all must be saved. And in imagination, and our imagination reshaping memory is the process whereby salvation is brought to pass. None is to be discarded. No one is to be rejected, pushed aside, or unwanted because of where they currently are or what they have done in the past. The revision being the first act of cure or correction reshapes the memory. This process of salvation is preservation or deliverance. It's the act of saving from harm, risk, loss, or destruction. This process of salvation is to change what you're seeing outside of you, to change what you are seeing in 3D. When you revise, what you are doing is you are imagining new content. So when you imagine the new content, you are changing both the man who has asked and both the man who gives. Neville tells us that condemn a man for having lost his way is to punish the already punished. Now this is judgment. We must remember not what he was, but what he may become in our imaginal activity. And that is revision. That is transformation. So you don't remember what the person was, but you bring into your imaginal space. You imagine what he could become in your imaginal activity. The next story is The New Woman. And JB writes into Neville. She says, "My husband, child of a broken home and raised by beloved grandparents, was never close to his mother, nor she to him. A woman of 63 and a divorcee for 32 of those years, she was lonely and embittered, and my relationship with her was strained as I attempted to stay in the middle. By her own admission, her great desire was to remarry for companionship, but she believed this to be impossible at her age. My husband would often state to me that he hoped she would remarry, and as he fervently put it, perhaps live way out of town. I had the same wish, and as I put it, perhaps move to China. Being wary of my personal motive for this wish, I knew I must change my feeling towards her in my imaginal drama, and at the same time give her what she wanted. I began by seeing her in my imagination as a completely changed personality, a happy, joyous woman, secure and contented in a new relationship. Every time I thought of her, I would see her mentally as a new woman. About 3 weeks later, she came to our house for a visit, bringing a friend she met many months previously. The friend had recently become a widower. He was her age, secure financially, and had grown children and grandchildren. We liked him, and I was excited because it was obvious they liked each other. But my husband still thought it was impossible. I didn't. From that day on, every time her image rose in my mind, I saw her extending her left hand toward me, and I admired the ring on her finger. 1 month later, she and her friend came to visit us, and as I walked forward to greet them, she proudly extended her left hand. The ring was on her finger. 2 weeks later, she was married, and we haven't seen her since. She lives in a brand new home, way out of town, and as her new husband dislikes the long drive to our house, she might as well have moved to China. Another case for raising someone else in your imagination. What you see and what you believe to be true of them when they are raised is what changes in your reality. Our next case study. RK learned that we may rob others of their abilities by our attitudes towards them. He changed his attitude and thereby changed effect. He says, "I am not a money lender, nor am I in the investment business as such. But a friend and business acquaintance came to me for a substantial loan in order to expand his plant. Because of his personal friendship, I granted the loan with reasonable interest rates and gave my friend the right of renewal at the end of 1 year. When the first term expired, he was behind in his interest payments and requested a 30-day extension on the note. I granted this request, but at the end of 30 days, he was still unable to meet the note and asked for an additional extension. As I previously stated, I'm not in the business of lending money. Within 20 days, I needed full payment of the loan to meet debts of my own. But I consented again to extend the note, although my own credit was in serious jeopardy. The natural thing to do was to apply legal pressure to collect, and a few years ago, I would have done just that. Instead, I remembered your warning not to rob others of their ability, and I realized that I had been robbing my friend of his ability to pay what he owed. The fourth day, I received a telephone call from him. He told me that by what he called a miracle, he had received so many orders and big ones too. He was now able to pay back my loan, including all interest due. In fact, he had just mailed a check to me for the entire amount. Okay. So we see by revising memories, forgiving, assuming positive states internally, one reforms oneself and others. The world endlessly reconfigures around imagination's content. This particular video is quite important in terms of revision, especially when you're encountering others, especially when you encounter others in your life that you may be having challenges or conflicts with. Applying the art of self-revision is to take the undesirable, rewrite it in your imagination, go into the quiet space, drop into the state akin to sleep, particularly before you're going to bed at night. And what you will then do is you will take into your subconscious mind the new state. You must have the feeling of accomplishment. How would you feel when whatever it is, whatever the desired end is, how would you feel when that is accomplished? Would you have a feeling of relief? Would you have a feeling of joy? So look at what that would be. When you construct your imaginal scene, you must bring the feeling in, and you will only repeat that new constructed scene in your imagination. You may do it for one night, you may do it for 3 nights, you may have to do it for a month. It's totally going to be up to you in terms of how natural and how real it feels. That old scene, that old memory must be pushed out. You must not have any feeling, any thoughts, any remembrance around it. You must also change how it is that you see the other person. So in this week's in this week's video, we talked about raising others in our imagination, which is quite important because when we raise others, we are also raising ourselves. When we raise ourselves, we change who we change who we would be identifying as and with, and therefore the world then starts to shape and change around what we have imagined. Neville Goddard stated that revision was so powerful that if it was the only thing you were to learn, you would be able to make a shift and change in your reality. So it's been great to have you along in this week's video. If you have questions, please put them down below. What was your biggest takeaway in terms of this week's video? This is Fazila Bijo. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being part of this channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.